Story 1. The Chicago Tylenol murders occurred in 1982. Someone was switching the medicine inside the capsules with poison and putting it back on the shelf for people to purchase and use, resulting in 7 deaths and a few copycat incidents. This incident changed global culture, package safety, and anti-tampering measures regarding medicine, food, and practically any substance applied to or consumed by the body. Story 2. In ancient Greece, the Pythagoreans were a secret religious society that kept their discoveries, both mathematical and otherwise, to themselves. Then one of their members publicized their teachings, earning their wrath and resulting in his expulsion or possibly a death sentence. This was a monumental event because, unlike in Egypt or Persia, where astronomers and scientists closely guarded their secrets, it ushered in a new age where people shared their scientific and mathematical findings with the world, accelerating intellectual progress. It was Hippasus, the man credited with the discovery of irrational numbers. According to legend, despite his many contributions, Hippasus is also remembered for his death. He was cast into the sea by the Pythagoreans because he revealed their secret teachings to the outside world. This act was seen as a betrayal of the Pythagorean way of life and was considered a serious offense. Story 3. The Broad Street cholera outbreak of 1854 was a significant event. The local doctor was convinced that the disease was present in the water supply. He had the handle of the water pump removed, and as a result, the number of cases dropped dramatically. This incident initiated 2 important developments: scientific investigation of disease outbreaks and the field of microbiology. Story 4. Facebook started the events feature in 2005 and the groups feature in October 2010. In December 2010, Tunisia overthrew its government, and the revolution spread throughout the Arab world. Egypt, Libya, and Syria all organized through the 2 features on Facebook. Story 5. The Spanish-American War is a footnote for most people, but it set the United States on the path it is on today. Story 6. Stanislav Petrov chose to ignore an alarm that indicated the United States had fired 5 missiles toward Moscow. He disobeyed military orders and saved the world from nuclear war in 1983. Story 7. The 99-day reign of Frederick III of Prussia may have changed the course of history. World War I and everything that followed may never have occurred if he had not been fatally ill when he ascended the throne. Story 8. The 2008 crash nearly resulted in a complete collapse of the market, potentially worse than the Great Depression. If I recall correctly, it came down to just a few hours. Story 9. While studying Staphylococcus bacteria, Dr. Alexander Fleming noticed that a mold contaminating one of his petri dishes had created a bacteria-free zone around itself. He identified a substance in the mold that he called penicillin, which inhibited bacterial growth. The introduction of penicillin likely prevented as many as 500 million deaths, making it one of the most life-saving medical advances in history. Story 10. When the mitochondria stop being symbiotic bacteria in living bodies and become naturally occurring organelles in the cells of living organisms. Story 11. The eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815 caused a volcanic winter in parts of Europe, leading to food shortages and famine. Scared aristocrats were confined to their manors, entertaining each other with stories. Thanks to them, we have Frankenstein and Dracula. Horses transitioned from transportation to a food source, forcing people to seek alternative means of transport and leading to the invention of the velocipede. During this time, those who were starving developed fertilizers that allowed food to grow in harsh conditions. Story 12. I'm guessing the shutdown of Adobe Flash has eliminated much of the childhood media we enjoyed. Adobe Flash played an important role in the early days of the internet. It was used for interactive web pages, advertising, animated videos, and video games. Story 13. Jeri Ryan was cast as 7 of 9 on Star Trek, Voyager. Her character is popular, her role is extended, and she has to live in Los Angeles, straining her marriage with the up-and-coming Republican politician Jack Ryan in Illinois. They divorced in 1999. In 2004, Jack Ryan was running for the Illinois Senate seat, already held by retiring Republican Peter Fitzgerald. A judge decided to release the records of Ryan's divorce, which revealed that he had repeatedly asked his then-wife Jeri Ryan to perform public acts with him at BDSM clubs in multiple cities in the mid-1990s. Ryan withdrew his candidacy for Senate over the scandal as optics mattered at the time, and his opponent, a little-known Democrat named Barack Obama, was waved into the Senate unopposed. The rest is history. Obama goes on a meteoric rise as the senator from Illinois, culminating in being elected president just 4 years later. He not only became the first black president in U.S. history, but also defeated the very popular Republican John McCain, who would have likely defeated any other opponent. So the reason that Obama was president from 2008 to 2016 is that Jeri Ryan was cast as the cool board lady in a leotard on Star Trek Voyager in the 1990s. Story 14. When Lucille Ball saved Star Trek, it was set to be canceled after the very first season. She bought the rights and started shooting at Desilu Studios. Star Trek introduced automatic doors, cell phones, and the first televised interracial kiss. The franchise continues to break barriers and inspires the new scientific minds of tomorrow. I am a Jedi like my mother before me, but those Federation fans have my respect. Story 15. Behind the Bastards made a compelling argument that Oprah's coverage of the Satanic Panic may have laid the groundwork for QAnon and Donald Trump's presidency. Story 16. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine near Cuba was being depth-charged by the United States Navy. Cut off from communication and overheating, the captain believed World War III had started and wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo. Protocol required agreement from 3 officers. 2 agreed, but one man, Vasily Arkhipov, said no. He prevented the launch, surfaced the submarine, and likely averted nuclear war. He literally saved the world, yet most people have never heard of him. Story 17. I don't know if I'd call it a moment, but the year 536 AD is otherwise known as the worst year in history. 3 volcanic events occurred around the same time, causing a volcanic winter. Temperatures dropped, crops failed, livestock died, and people starved to death across a large portion of the world. It had devastating consequences that lasted for years. It was one of the causes of the plague of Justinian and the fall of the Roman Empire. Millions of people were killed worldwide at a time when populations were nowhere near what they are today. Story 18. The Battle of Jumonville Glen in 1754, where a 22-year-old George Washington first experienced battle, involved approximately 50 colonials and allied natives against about 30 French soldiers in a remote area of Pennsylvania beyond the Appalachian Mountains, which served as the nominal border between British and French colonial territory in the New World. This small engagement initiated the French and Indian War, which subsequently led to the 7 Years' War and later to the American War of Independence. These events significantly influenced the French Revolution, which gave rise to Napoleon, who reshaped Germany among other achievements. This paved the way for the later unification of Germany, establishing much of the groundwork for World War I, which directly led to World War II and the Cold War that followed. All of these events connect to the modern state of the world. Washington's actions that day have had lasting effects that continue to resonate today. A 15-minute confrontation between fewer than 90 men in a remote corner of southwestern Pennsylvania has shaped our world as we know it. Story 19. The Chinese loom and spinning wheel caused a chain reaction that led to an abundance of paper and books, establishing connections with James Burke. Story 20. The invention of the mechanical clock and the pendulum clock 350 years later marked a significant advancement. Given how much many of our systems now rely on accurate timekeeping and the discoveries and inventions made possible by increasingly precise timepieces, this was a massive breakthrough. Story 21. The Bretton Woods Conference took place in 1944, where approximately 730 delegates from all 44 Allied nations gathered at a large hotel in New Hampshire to outlaw practices deemed harmful to global prosperity. This conference established the international banking system and led to the creation of the International Monetary Fund. All currencies were required to be convertible for trade, and exchange rates were adjusted to ensure no nation would be favored over another. These actions ultimately contributed to the development of the World Bank. However, the downside is that the world's economy became interconnected, meaning that one reckless president's tariff disputes or ego-driven conflicts can jeopardize the entire global economy. Story 22. Henry Ford mass-produced cars with internal combustion engines. Cars have dramatically changed the physical landscape, replacing rail as the primary means of mass travel. This led to the proliferation of paved streets, highways, parking lots, gas stations, motels, and fast food outlets. It also contributed to congestion, urban sprawl, air pollution, and climate change. The demand for oil has influenced geopolitics for over a century. Story 23. There was a day in deep history when someone had the idea of turning spoken words into drawn symbols on clay or rock. We don't know who or when this happened, but it was the day literacy was born. Story 24. The assassination of Tsar Alexander II. Alexander III, who is a radical conservative, succeeds him, blames the Jews for the death, and enacts the May Laws in the early 1880s. 2 to 3 million Jews emigrate from the Pale of Settlement due to oppression. Most go to the United States, while hundreds of thousands go to Germany. This influx of migrants upsets Germans, setting the stage for the Holocaust. It is also the beginning of applied Zionism and the earnest movement of Jews to Israel, leading to the situation we have today. No assassination, no Holocaust, no Israel-Palestine conflict. Story 25. In San Francisco in 1906, there was a massive earthquake, probably one of the most devastating to occur in the United States. In the immediate aftermath, the president of a small regional bank known as the Bank of Italy took all of the money out of its vaults and walked down the streets handing out loans to people so that they could rebuild. They were one of the first banks to start lending money during the Reconstruction. This bank was founded specifically on the principle of providing personal loans to workers, the low and middle class, rather than simply the upper class, most notably to Italian immigrants and settlers, hence the name. The Bank of Italy would later merge with a smaller bank known as Bank of America in Los Angeles. The two banks would become what is today Bank of America. Story 26. People seem to forget the Boxing Day tsunami of 2004 when listing the most significant events of the 21st century. It is right up there with September 11th, the COVID-19 pandemic, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Story 27. The siege of Sijitvar occurred when Suleiman the Magnificent was on a campaign into Europe with an army of 50,000 to 100,000 Ottoman soldiers. They first had to deal with the fortress of Sijitvar to avoid being flanked later. The fortress was manned by only around 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. Over the course of a month, they managed to inflict 20,000 to 30,000 casualties while holding out against the Ottomans. During this period, Suleiman died, and the fortress was ultimately lost, but the resistance significantly weakened the Ottomans, forcing them to retreat eastward. This battle, along with the bravery of the 3,000 Hungarians and Croatians, is seen by some historians as having saved Western civilization. Story 28. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest was a pivotal event that marked the end of Roman expansion into northern Europe, halting at the Rhine. This clash of cultures between southern and northern Europe persists to this day and has contributed to numerous conflicts, including the Reformation and the 30 Years' War. Story 29. Pascal and Fermat discovered probability theory in the 17th century. Without it, there would be no risk-based insurance, and without that, there would be no capitalism, for better or worse. Probability models made insurance a reasonable financial proposition instead of a guessing game, enabling the underwriting of larger and more complex ventures. Story 30. The Suez Crisis of 1956 does not receive the attention it deserves outside of history circles, but it was essentially the moment when the United Kingdom and France officially lost their status as global superpowers, and the United States established itself as the dominant Western force. Quick recap. Egypt's President Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, which had been controlled by British and French interests. In response, the United Kingdom, France, and Israel launched a secret military operation to reclaim control. They assumed the United States would support them or at least remain neutral. Spoiler, the United States did not. President Eisenhower was furious. They acted without consulting him, and he viewed it as colonial overreach during the Cold War. He used the full weight of American economic power to halt their actions, threatening to undermine the British pound if they did not back off. Why it's significant? This was the geopolitical gut punch that demonstrated to the old European empires that their time was over. From that point on, the United States and the Soviet Union were the only true superpowers. It also propelled many former colonies further toward independence and significantly boosted non-aligned movements. It was not a massive bloody war like World War II or Vietnam, but in terms of its long-term impact on global power structures, it was absolutely significant. Most people have no idea. Story 31. At some point in her life, Queen Victoria of England spontaneously mutated one of her genes on her X chromosome. As a woman, she had a redundant copy in the other gene, so she experienced no physical effects. However, she passed this mutation on to her descendants across European royal families. Males who inherited the mutation suffered from hemophilia. Her grandson Alexei, the son of the Tsar of Russia, was among them. In despair, his mother sought the help of the monk Rasputin, who seemed to alleviate his symptoms. Over time, he gained increasing influence over the royal family, ultimately becoming the power behind the throne. This enraged the Russian people and led to the communists successfully leading a revolution and establishing the Soviet Union. Throughout the 20th century, the United States and the Soviet Union engaged in a Cold War, with many proxy wars occurring on their behalf. One of these conflicts was in Afghanistan, where the United States supported the Taliban in their fight against the Soviets. Later, the Taliban became patrons to al-Qaeda, providing a base from which they plotted and carried out the attacks of September 11th. Easily the most consequential single genetic mutation in history. Story 32. The invention of the humble shipping container may not be a defining moment, but it is certainly a significant event. Its impact is immense. Imagine global trade today without standardized shipping containers. They completely revolutionized the industry, making it faster, safer, and cheaper. Every item around you likely arrived in your country in a shipping container. While it may seem easy to take for granted now, this system has dramatically increased transport efficiency and reduced costs, effectively enabling globalization as we know it today. Story 33. While not wildly significant, it is quite important. During the Battle of Midway, a search plane on a Japanese aircraft carrier experienced a mechanical problem. This search plane ended up being the one that located an American carrier. However, due to the mechanical failure, it launched late. As a result, it discovered the Americans late. Because it found the Americans late, a decision made by Japanese leaders a few minutes earlier had to be reversed. Consequently, the Japanese carriers were unable to launch an attack on the Americans and were instead caught completely unprepared when American planes struck. Due to the malfunctioning search plane, the Japanese suffered a substantial loss and never had a realistic chance of winning the war afterward. Story 34. I often contemplate how Hillary Clinton might have won the 2016 election if an investigation into her emails had not been reopened due to someone named Wiener continuing to send inappropriate pictures. Story 35. Just my opinion, but the battles of Kok and Gol between the Soviet Union and the Empire of Japan in 1939 were significant. The Japanese attempted to invade Mongolia but were decisively pushed back by the Soviets, never to engage with them again. This is impactful because of what happened in 1941. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler had no reason to declare war on the United States, but he did. He likely hoped that this would inspire Japan to declare war on the Soviet Union as well, forcing them to fight a two-front war and alleviating pressure on the German forces. Unfortunately for Adolf, Japan had quietly decided after Kok and Gol that engaging the Soviets was best avoided. If Hitler had known that, perhaps he wouldn't have declared war on the United States and could have focused on fighting Japan, leaving Europe to the Europeans. While the Nazis might not have succeeded in taking Russia, Germany may not have faced complete defeat and occupation without the considerable economic and manufacturing power the United States applied to the European theater. Story 36. Princip encountered Archduke Ferdinand by chance. 45 minutes after Ferdinand survived the first assassination attempt, Princip completed the assassination. World War I was likely to occur eventually, but it started this way that day. It ushered in the Treaty of Versailles and a wounded but alive Adolf Hitler. Story 37. The reign of King Knut set the stage for the Norman conquest and significantly influenced the English language. Story 38. The failure of Reconstruction and the capitulation by Andrew Johnson to the Dixiecrats after Lincoln's assassination make me reflect on what could have been in this country, and it deeply frustrates me. Story 39. Money and Politics. Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, 2010. The Supreme Court ruled that corporations and unions have a First Amendment right to spend unlimited money on political advocacy, as long as it is independent of campaigns and not directly coordinated with candidates. SpeechNow.org versus Federal Election Commission, 2010, same year. In a lower court case in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia, this ruling established that contributions to independent political action committees can be unlimited. Story 40. The Battle of Milvian Bridge in ancient Rome in 312 AD solidified Constantine's faith in Christianity and led to his deathbed conversion, which sparked a Christian revolution that shaped the world as we know it today. Interestingly, Maxentius had essentially taken over Rome, so Constantine led an army back to retake it. Maxentius had the Milvian Bridge rigged with removable bolts that were to be pulled at the right moment, causing Constantine's army to plunge into the Tiber River. Meanwhile, Constantine was discreetly advised by some bishops, which was controversial in pagan Roman times. They convinced him to have the first two letters of Christ's name painted on his army's shields, equivalent to having a cross painted on them. Midway through the clash, a soldier on Maxentius' side pulled the bolts too early, and most of Maxentius' army fell into the river, gifting Constantine the victory. This event was seen as a sign from God and led to a softening of the anti-Christian laws and the eventual conversion of Rome's famed emperor on his deathbed. So those bolts in the bridge, those relatively small items caused the rise of one of the biggest religions the globe has ever seen and sparked an entire religious and cultural revolution that continues to play a significant role in everyone's lives. It's a battle that many people do not discuss, and while the story of the bolts is just one interpretation of the events, it is a compelling narrative. Story 41. The Fourth Crusade. The Byzantine Empire was still moderately strong at that time, able to hold its own against the Turks but rife with internal struggle. If the betrayal at Constantinople and the sack of the city had never happened, the empire might have survived for much longer, perhaps even until modern days. The Ottomans would never have risen, and their empire would never have existed. The Balkan nations, Hungary, and Romania would have remained independent, or at least under the control of other Christians. The Habsburgs and the Polish would have had far different interests. The Armenian and Greek genocides would never have occurred, and the border between Europe and Asia, Christianity and Islam, would be somewhere in Anatolia, not at the modern Greek-Turkish border. Story 42. The White Ship disaster had a significant impact on England. In November 1120, during a trip from France to England, the ship sank in the harbor of Barfla. Approximately 300 people, including the heir to the English throne, perished, leading to a succession crisis. Empress Matilda was named heir, but following the death of Henry I, his nephew Stephen seized the throne, resulting in a civil war known as the Anarchy, 1135 to 1153. This event was a major part of early English history, occurring just a generation after William the Conqueror, and had a profound political impact on the country, although it is not widely known. Story 43. How fortunate America was that the USS Vestal survived Pearl Harbor. The Vestal was a repair ship that went on to service major vessels during the Pacific War, such as the Saratoga, South Dakota, and the Enterprise. Story 44. During the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, off the coast of Cuba, the United States dropped depth charges into the ocean near a Russian submarine. The crew of the submarine, uncertain about the nature of the charges, began to believe that the conflict had escalated into all-out war. They were armed with nuclear weapons and, in the event of war, were expected to use them. To deploy their nuclear weapons, the consent of 3 specific officers aboard the submarine was required. 2 of them agreed to launch the nuclear weapons, but the 3rd officer, Vasily Arkhipov, decided against it, as they could not be certain that war had broken out. Without his agreement, they could not launch the weapons. They surfaced, realized that war had not broken out, and the world continued on. Had they launched the weapons, the United States likely would have responded with a nuclear strike, leading to further escalation. By refraining from quick violence, Vasily Arkhipov probably saved the world that day. This is a brief version of the story. I do not remember all the details, but I have always considered it an incredible high-stakes moment in history. It is astonishing to think about. Story 45. The Battle of the Metaurus, 207 BC. Hasdrubal Barca, brother of Hannibal, was on his way to reinforce him in Italy. He was defeated in this battle, which led to the decline of Carthage and secured the dominance of Rome. Story 46. One of Herman Cortez's rival conquistadors was a man named Panfilo de Narvaez. He arrived in Veracruz in 1520 with an African slave on board his ship, named Francisco Eguía. Eguía had smallpox and is recorded as the first case of the disease in the Americas. The entire history of the Columbian exchange, colonialism, and the New World would have been drastically different if that infection had never taken hold. It seems inevitable that someone would have brought smallpox to the Americas, but the individuals who did are largely forgotten in history. Story 47. When Rupert Murdoch launched Fox News in the United States, he diminished the value of truth and cemented the rise of fascism. Story 48. Henry VIII separated from the Roman Catholic Church and established government control over religion. This shifted power to secular authorities. Story 49. The murder-suicide known as the Mayerling incident was committed by Austria's Prince Rudolf. If not for this, he would have become emperor, and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand might not have sparked World War I, thus preventing Hitler's rise to power after Austria's defeat. Story 50. The Magna Carta and all subsequent treaties that recognized human rights highlight the astonishing number of people who don't realize how important these rights and principles are. Additionally, it is concerning how willing some individuals are to renounce or deny these rights because they conflict with their beliefs. Story 51. Winston Churchill, before World War II, was head of the British Navy, the largest admiralty in the world at the time, spread across the empire. He made the decision to convert all ships from coal power to oil power, creating an urgent need for oil and fueling stations worldwide, initiating a process whose effects are still evident today. Story 52. The fraud that ruined the world. Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad Company. Story 53. The invention of a white light-emitting diode was incredibly difficult, and it completed the LED revolution, completely changing lighting design forever. Story 54. The invention of the birth control pill has had one of the most significant societal impacts of any single invention, possibly second only to the automobile. You often find brief mentions of it in chemistry textbooks, but its importance extends far beyond that context. Story 55. The Victoria Hall disaster in Sunderland, England, 1883. A children's variety show was held at the Victoria Hall in Sunderland, catering to both the wealthy and the less fortunate. One of the main attractions of the show was the distribution of presents. The problem was that the performers could only throw the gifts into the crowd directly in front of the stage. Children seated in the higher tiers realized they would miss out, so they surged down to the lower level. Another major issue was that the door to the lower level was stuck, allowing only one person to pass through, which was intended to manage ticket evaders. The doors could only be opened from the children's side, leading to a devastating crush that resulted in the deaths of 183 children. The news of the tragedy spread worldwide and is the reason why we have specific laws regarding emergency exits and doors that open outward in buildings to this day. Story 56. The Tampa Crisis in Australia. John Howard's statement, "We will decide who comes to this country and the way in which they come," has impacted Australian politics for more than 20 years and influenced immigration policy worldwide, often negatively. John Howard's policies have been widely criticized. Story 57. The downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007 by the Soviet Union in 1983 involved a passenger airliner that flew over restricted Soviet airspace due to a navigational error and was shot down. Afterwards, among many other things, President Reagan ordered the global positioning system to be released to the civilian world as a common good. Before then, the global positioning system was a United States military technology, and its release to the public was intended to prevent something like this from happening again. So, a couple of pilots in a cockpit making mistakes is why we have the ability to look up directions on our phones. Story 58. Scipio Africanus set out on a campaign to defeat the Carthaginians, ultimately culminating in his victory over Hannibal Barca at the Battle of Zama. Had Scipio not defeated Hannibal, the Roman Empire might never have existed. The rise and fall of the Roman Empire is one of the most influential series of events in European history. Even today, many major events in European history have revolved around attempts to reestablish the Roman Empire, conflicts over who has the right to do so, resistance to these attempts, and disputes over its legacy. If Hannibal had succeeded in conquering Rome, as he nearly did, the history of Europe could have been dominated by a Phoenician empire based in North Africa and the legacy that might have followed. Story 59. Wildly significant for the United States and Mexico, during the Mexican-American War, the United States had Santa Anna surrounded in Mexico City. An ambassador was sent to negotiate a surrender, but things were taking too long and Congress lost patience. They sent a letter revoking his authority and were prepared to complete the invasion militarily. However, the ambassador kept the letter revoking his authority secret and proceeded to negotiate for 3 days, resulting in the forgiveness of Mexico's debt in exchange for a vast territory that is now part of the United States. Story 60. I feel that the internal combustion engine does not receive enough appreciation. It shapes the infrastructure of modern cities, often referred to as the built environment. It also helped lift many people out of poverty in the past in the Western world, as it was connected to numerous industries that provided essential jobs. Even today, it continues to have the same impact in some African and Asian countries. Story 61. They are eating the dogs during the presidential debate. Reasons why this is significant. 1. Trump demonstrated how easily he could be manipulated by others. He is incapable of distinguishing fact from fiction. He was willing to demonize an entire group of people for his own political gain. More than half the country still voted for him. What is going on? Story 62. Obama decided to request only $800 billion in stimulus from Congress in January and February 2009. He had over 70% approval, a large electoral mandate, and the economy was cratering. The actual economic analysis indicated that it needed at least $1.2 trillion in stimulus. However, Rahm Emanuel determined that Congress would not support something in the trillion-dollar range, so they reduced the request for trivial reasons. Apparently, they did not allow any of Obama's economic advisors to present the $1.2 trillion option. Rahm and Summers made the $800 billion option the larger amount offered to Obama, but ultimately, Obama selected these advisors, so the responsibility lies with him. The too small stimulus led to an anemic recovery, resulting in the 2010 midterm elections where the Republican Party gerrymandered numerous states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Consequently, Obama's congressional agenda was effectively halted, leading to the Democrats losing the Senate in 2014, preventing Obama from replacing Justice Scalia, and ultimately resulting in the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The consequences of this one poor decision at the start of his presidency during a historic turning point continue to resonate today. Story 63. The Battle of Warsaw, specifically the one in 1920, is little known in most countries, but it has historically been argued as the moment when Bolshevik communism failed in its march to the West. Following the dissolution of the three empires that had occupied their territories, the Poles were attempting to create an entirely new country from what had been three nations, while also seeking to resolve disputes between Poles and various ethnic minorities living alongside them. In 1919, the veteran Bolshevik Red Army invaded with the intention of toppling Poland and incorporating it into their new communist state, using Poland as a launching point to attack Germany. The war was going poorly for Poland, with their leaders representing a coalition of opposing ideologies, their army poorly equipped with remnants from three separate forces, and the necessity to convince soldiers during the conflict that a Poland as a nation indeed exists. However, political machinations by Stalin and interpersonal disputes among Red Army leaders created an opportunity for a potential breakthrough that was so unlikely that the Soviets intercepted the plans but dismissed them as obviously false, a crude attempt at subversion by Polish intelligence. The Polish ultimately succeeded in that war, eventually pushing the Bolsheviks out of their country and finally establishing the nation they had envisioned. Had they failed in Warsaw, it is widely accepted that the new Polish Republic would have inevitably dissolved, and upon reaching the German border, the Red Army would have begun organizing with German communist groups for a joint attack to overthrow that country, and who knows what else would have followed. Story 64. The Suez Crisis was one of the most underrated events of the 20th century. It is a staple of international relations courses and is often overlooked on social media in favor of obscure Latin American coups. The balance of power in the world changed overnight. Empires that had been a mainstay of the world order for centuries were displaced by new ones in just a week with relatively little bloodshed. Global financial markets were leveraged to end a significant conflict. This event serves as a vital lesson in today's world. A nation's status as a global empire depends on its network of allies. Without a doubt, this is one of the most underrated moments in modern history. Story 65. Gutenberg's invention of movable type and the printing press in 1440 revolutionized the way information was disseminated. Before this, all books were hand-copied, often by monks, and most ordinary people were illiterate. Only the wealthy could afford books. The printing press was as groundbreaking in its time as the internet has been in ours, perhaps even more so. For the first time, ordinary people could replicate documents and print books, which significantly increased the literacy rate and allowed more individuals to read and write. Story 66. A lot of people know that the Federal Bureau of Investigation investigated Hillary Clinton's emails during the 2016 election. However, most casual followers of politics in the United States may not remember how wildly inappropriate it was for the FBI Director James Comey to announce such an investigation and for the media to cover it in that manner. It arguably cost Clinton the election since it was announced so close to Election Day, when most people are paying attention to politics, and it was framed in such a negative way despite the relatively unimportant nature of the matter being investigated. The fallout from that has resulted in many negative consequences, including hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths from Donald Trump's handling of COVID-19, and now many more deaths due to his illegal cutting off of funding. Story 67. Battle of Warsaw, 1920. The miracle on the Vistula. Poland unexpectedly turns back the Red Army and halts Soviet advances into Europe. Story 68. Enrico Dandolo was a leader of Venice. He funded a crusade, and the Crusaders compensated him by giving him Constantinople. This significantly weakened the Byzantine Empire, which led to the rise of the Ottoman Empire, becoming the predominant world power for approximately 400 years. Story 69. The Battle of the Chesapeake on September 5, 1781, was one of the most consequential battles in American history, despite the absence of American participation. The British had sent a large naval force to Yorktown to relieve the siege. Had they landed, Washington's army would have been overwhelmed. However, the French Navy caught a fortunate wind and arrived at the entrance to the bay first. The ensuing battle was relatively small compared to something like the Battle of Trafalgar, but the French won, and the British ships had to turn back. By defeating the British relief force, the French Navy sealed the fate of Cornwallis's army and ensured American independence. Story 70. The sale of Fort Ross, California. Russia was colonizing the West Coast long before the United States reached the Mississippi River. A decline in trade and resources led them to sell much of their holdings just a few years before gold was discovered. Without the gold rush to facilitate westward expansion, the Russian colony could have grown into its own independent country, possibly altering world dynamics in significant ways. Story 71. John Snow's cholera map, created in 1854, was a groundbreaking visualization that helped reveal the source of a cholera outbreak in London. The map displayed clusters of cholera cases around the Broad Street pump, leading Snow to identify the pump as the source of contaminated water. This work is considered a cornerstone of epidemiology and disease mapping. Story 72. George Washington's farewell speech warned against the dangers of political parties, emphasizing that they would divide the country. This warning is significant because it has proven true, as people today often avoid discussing whom they voted for to prevent arguments. Additionally, I believe that political parties have led to a broader division in society, manifesting in choices like Samsung or iPhone, Ford or Chevy, and Starbucks or Dunkin'. Story 73. The invention of the air conditioner has greatly benefited everyone living in hot climates. People owe Willis Carrier their gratitude. Story 74. Trump's victory in this election was significant. This was the most important election in over 100 years, and almost no one realized it. I feel concerned for the nation's future. We had one chance to stop it, but no one recognized the danger. It is frustrating, and I dislike widespread ignorance. It is harmful. It may take decades to address the consequences of what is happening now and what may occur in the coming years. Nothing will remain the same. Everything will be worse than it should have been for almost every person alive today. Your future is now diminished permanently until the end of your life. Most people will never comprehend this reality, and that is disheartening. It means many will not learn from it and will assume this is normal. It is not. This situation is significantly worse, and there is nothing I can personally do about it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.